Ooh, where'd she go?
Hello. Just checking to see if you two can hear me online a little bit. Not at all. A little. Okay. Okay. Good. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. I'm like, I'll answer whatever I need to answer later. I know. I drank lots of tea, so I 3 bags right before, so I could be awake for my. Mm, too much. Yeah. It's funny. What is that? Oh, I see. Huh? Um. Yeah, I don't think I need to. Just want to hang out with Veronica too. She's here. Veronica's moderating. Yeah.
Sophia, this is Gillian. If you can hear us, we can't hear you.
We can hear you.
Okay. My headset not working. It's actually doing the opposite of blocking you out. How's my sound quality?
Your sound quality is great.
Okay.
We're so happy to hear you.
All right. Well, we'll just go with it and take my headset off. Eileen, you want to do a quick audio check?
Yep, I'm here now, and
All right.
we could not hear her before. It was not your headset, Gillian.
All right. And then Sophia, you have people in the room. I see, is there 17 people online? And then is there people there in the room?
Sorry, would you mind repeating that?
Are there people there in the room as well? I see that we've got about 18 people online in the session. And then are you in a room convened right now?
Yes, we are in a room convening. People are trickling in, and we're ready to start when you are.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get us started, and just get my timer on here.
Great, and we're going to go to 4:20, just so you know.
Okay.
Sorry to interrupt.
And then would you do me a favor? I'm assuming I'm going to indicate to you to advance the slides then?
Yes, that would be great.
Okay.
Just the next slide whenever you're ready for it.
All right. Well, I wish I could see all of you who are in the room and online. My name is Dr. Gillian Middlestead. I'm the director of the Tribal Healthy Homes Network. I've worked with the Tulalip Tribes almost 30 years. So I implement air quality, indoor and ambient programs, healthy home programs. And then with the Tribal Healthy Homes Network, hopefully some of you have been a part of our programs. We do a lot of research, training, technical assistance around healthy homes. Today, we're going to talk about something we've been working on for the last couple of years, which is sort of really near and dear to my heart, which is that elders are some of the most significantly impacted. I also want to say, I know you've been in sessions all day and it's hard to digest this much information. We're happy to provide technical assistance and to connect you with variety of people who are working on this topic. So if you can only absorb about half of what we throw at you today, definitely follow up, because we believe right now that tailoring programs to those who are most likely to show up in the ER is a really critical way to go about addressing some of the climate and the air issues. So today, three buckets we're going to cover. One is, what are the risks? Two, what is the prevention from a housing strategy? And then we also are going to talk about funding, of course, because that's always the component that we all want to know is regardless of what we're going to do, where are we going to get the money to do it? So you can go ahead and go to the next slide. Eileen Gagney, our technical advisor and trainer, is here today as well. And some of you may have heard her present in the past on similar topics. She'll be covering the last half of the presentation with me. And I'm not seeing the slide advance. Is that a lag, or is it just that it's not advanced yet?
It should be advanced. It has your names visible right now.
Interesting. It's frozen on page 1 on my end. So what I'm going to do is open up my own. Sorry, guys. Appreciate your patience here. Okay, so if you would go ahead and go past the names and go to the slide that says climate events are a risk multiplier.
We're here.
Okay, fantastic. So the slide is just fairly self-explanatory, but what we're trying to convey here is that we've had air quality issues for decades. We've had indoor air issues, and that the climate events that we're experiencing in the Western states, mostly heat, wildfire, smoke, and infectious disease, all of them, they're exacerbating at a chemical and a particle level what we're already exposed to in the indoor environments. It's not like we'd addressed all the indoor air issues and now we've got climate. It's that they're intersecting in a pretty dangerous way because of the interactions between heat, smoke, and other chemical contaminants. Next slide. Okay, so what we have, I just realized I had to advance my own slide too. As you all know, during COVID, during any kind of storm, during wildfire, smoke, and heat, our refuge is our homes. And hundreds of thousands of tribal housing units that I've worked with and been in and inspected have a legacy of underfunding through HUD. And so they have housing deficiencies. So instead of them being a refuge, they're actually a place where we might have higher rates of smoke infiltration than we might have if we were in a newer home. They may not be a refuge from heat due to inadequate cooling. So we have these risk factors of where we want to go during these events may actually not be the safest shelter. Next slide. And over the last couple of years in working on climate-related indoor air issues, all of the epidemiological data, oops, it jumped forward, or no, ignore that. It started indicating that it was the elders who were going to ER in the hospital at the highest rate during a heat or smoke event. So we wanted to take a step back and say, is there something we can be doing differently or more focused to ensure that those are the greatest risk because they are the most important community resource? Your slide is showing actually, and I'll just point out that as you all know, we all spend a great deal of time indoors, but for elders, the older people get, the more likely they're to spend time indoors, on average about 19 hours a day for older adults, which means they have a disproportionate amount of time to whatever they're being exposed in, whether it's in their home, a senior center, with their family, wherever that might be. So let's talk a little bit. I'm going to go back and talk about what are the biological risks. And if you want to go ahead and please advance the slide to where it says risks. And then the next one beyond that. So you're all probably dealing with the fact that we are encountering multiple significant risks for people in our communities, and in particular for elders. There's safety risks, like if there's an evacuation, they may have less mobility and they're more isolated. There's property risks, so damage, as you have seen during flooding events, right? Damage to their home and loss of their personal belongings. There's the emotional and psychological risks of all the disruption to their family, their community. But today, for just a few minutes, I'm going to talk about the health risks and try to explain why they are more biologically susceptible to climate risks and during heat events. Next slide. And I'm just going to give a couple of brief explanations, and then I'm going to give you a link. We did a webinar on this topic and had the chief cardiologist at Stanford provide an explanation of older adults and climate events. And he's brilliant, as you can imagine, because he's both a practicing cardiologist and works with elders and also studies the science. Great talk, and I'm going to give you a link to it in a minute. But basically, just so I can frame this conversation today. So basically, as we age, our cardiac output changes, and it doesn't respond to heat. It has a response like arrhythmia to heat-related dehydration. So there's that cardiac factor. And then our lungs actually become more susceptible as we age to any kind of inhaled particles and toxins. So they may be more likely to get inflamed or to develop a respiratory infection or virus after exposure. Next slide. Our kidneys and our gut function are actually something that changes as we age as well, and they are related to heat. So for an elder, their body's ability to redirect blood flow from the surface capillaries diminishes. So we cannot disperse the heat that our body is exposed to as well. Similarly, our skin is no longer functioning and regulating at the level that it used to. So older adults are going to have less sweat productivity, and their core body temperature then can't be cooled as naturally as it might have been when we're younger. The other part about that is evidently in the scientific literature, it says we're not as aware that our body temperature is rising as we age. So you may be not realizing you're dehydrated, not asking to go be in a cooling shelter, or not asking for more water because your body's not signaling that you've been exposed, at a dangerous level. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to briefly talk about, so what is the data now that we're really focusing on wildfire smoke and heat events in particular? What is the data saying about who's actually being harmed? There's a lot of research. I'm going to show just a couple studies just to sort of underlie what we're communicating today, which is the susceptibility of elders. If you want to go to the next slide, please. So in this, you can see there's a graphic on the right, the pie chart. On the left, you'll see that essentially in one study in Washington State, and I'm sure this can be replicated in California, Arizona, Washington, but in Washington during one heat event, 67% of all heat-related deaths were in individuals who were 65 and older. And the chart over here shows that it even starts as you move up into even age 45 to 64 is a higher proportion. So young adults are relatively immune to the effects of higher heat, but as we age, there's an incremental risk to premature death. Next slide. And this is just another example. This is from, they examined the maximum outdoor temperature and mortality rates in a pretty large cohort. So 95,000 people in nursing homes. This took place in Germany, but they were looking the same idea as saying, let's look at this most at-risk population and correlate it with temperatures. And they found that mortality or death increased by 26 and 62% when the temperature went from, so for example, between 32 degrees Celsius and 34, it's only a 2-degree jump, but mortality risk jumped from 26% all the way up to 62%. I apologize, that's not in Fahrenheit, but the point is just individual incremental increases in the temperature can have a significant and disproportionate effect in mortality. Next slide. So very briefly, let's see, are you all seeing wildfire smoke in the elderly now?
I think we're one slide behind you. Wildfire smoke and elderly. There you are. Now you are on the same. There you go.
All righty, fantastic. So I realize we're talking about heat today, but I want to also emphasize, because as you know, terribly unfortunately, but we have these intersecting events at times where we have a extreme heat event while we are still in a smoke event. And wildfire smoke is also, as heat is, particularly dangerous to older adults. Washington State, again, I apologize, this data is specific to my region. And if you're interested, I'd be happy to find data from your area. But essentially, they looked at a 10-year period and found that 84% of all the mortality that occurred explicitly associated with a smoke event was in adults age 65 and older. So again, we realize that the more we age, the less our systems are able to cope with either heat and or particles. On a positive note, next slide, please. Just want to share this particular visual because it's pretty powerful. And Eileen and I were talking earlier, and she mentioned kind of think of the left and the right as your lungs, but these are air filters. But in this particular study, what they found is that air filtration, they wanted to know not just if hospitalization was going to occur, but could they look at blood markers in individual and say, is there inflammation going on in a person's body in a room that is filtered of wildfire smoke and a room that is not filtered in a control group? And they found, as you can see, that inflammation in the body was reduced by 59%. And in people with COPD, that inflammation was reduced by 70%. That's pretty significant, and it may mean the difference between life and death or between hospitalization, intubation, and other adverse outcomes. So air filtration, as I'm sure you all know and are working on in all sorts of your community programs, it's incredibly important for elders. All right, and next slide. I'm just about to wrap up my section here, a few more slides. So Dr. Andrew Young Chang was the speaker. He talks for about 20 minutes. If you go to crh-seminarseries.net, and I apologize, I don't have a QR code today, but he starts at minute 25 in the webinar. Worth your time if you have it, just to hear someone who is a physician talk about the health effects. He's also followed by someone I'm going to mention in just a minute. So before I wrap up, I'm going to say a few things about prevention. Now, next slide, please. All right, and next slide. So for us in our work, and you might be able to relate, we have much greater need than we have time, resources, or money. So there's two areas we tend to focus on significantly at Tulalip and that we do in our work with tribes around the country. So we focus on resident awareness because, as you know, if you don't turn on the fan, if you don't change the filter, if you don't close the window, if you don't reach out to your physician, we can't get that person's risk level reduced, right? So resident awareness is a critical part of what we do. Conversely, we have to address the structural and mechanical deficits in these housings, lack of fans, lack of affordable heating and cooling, a house where the membrane isn't sufficient, so there's a lot of smoke. So when we talk today about prevention, we're going to talk just a little bit about both. Eileen's going to go heavily into the structural and mechanical. Maybe heavily isn't the right word. Next slide. I'm not going to read this slide. Again, I just want to emphasize that sort of that bucket on the left is there's a range of activities you can do to reduce infiltration of heat, reduce infiltration of smoke, and filter and ventilate what's already in the home. On the education side, the most important thing I can say is that we've made more progress in the last couple of years as we really ground ourselves in other programs. So tribes all over the US have given us these ideas. We do them at Tulalip, and then we also convey back and forth these ideas. But we've had our outreach now through Meals on Wheels, through elders events. We go to bingo, we go to health fairs, we go to after school events, we go to when new residents are moving in with our housing authority. So we try to reach people through as many different mechanisms as possible. And elders in particular, we're working with the elders program quite a bit to target that group. All right, and then next slide. So one thing I just want to emphasize too is that in some research we did, this was in early 2022, we surveyed tribes nationally to say, what are you working on when there's a heat or smoke event? What are the activities you're doing? Not sure how big the slide is in the room you're in right now, but essentially from left to right, you can see that pretty much, over half, 53%, are using social media during one of these events. A quarter using tribal email. Some may have tribal radio or TV. 26% were communicating by calling or visiting elders' homes. But what you can see on the right side, the pattern here is that direct outreach to elders is pretty minimal because we don't, at least if you're an IGAP, an air quality staff, if you're, depending on your program, things like going to a senior center and elders program, having their healthcare provider actually place calls to elders, having community health aides go ask elders about their safety, going to bingo hall and asking elders about what they have at home in terms of adequate cooling. We're not doing a lot of that yet. So, and as you can see, tribes also reported they weren't, because we don't have the arms and legs. So we're really working to build partnerships with the community health, public health, the housing as much as possible. And then, as you know, that's an ongoing, you always got to keep the wheels rolling on that bike because there's staff turnover. But we really have learned through our research also that to reach someone about risk often means face-to-face individual communication, not just a social media post. It helps, but people, we all need to hear things multiple ways. All right, next slide. Very briefly, one of the key questions that we wanted to do in our webinar when we did this is to say, how would elders actually want to be communicated? How do they want to stay inside? Who do they want to hear from? We don't want to make any assumptions that any programs that we've done. So we had a speaker from Tulalip who is, her name is Ashley Schmidt. She's on that same webinar. Next slide. I'm just going to show you a few things we asked her so that if you want to check in on this side of it, on that webinar to hear what she talks about, and she does a wonderful job. But we asked her, you know, what are the cultural generational factors when you're communicating with elders that we should be thinking about when we're communicating during heat events? So she answers that question in the webinar. Next slide. By the way, that's her now on the left. We also asked her to look at what other elder services that you're working with, where are their opportunities? We have this growing risk now of heat, smoke, and infectious disease. So we have to take advantage of something beyond all that which we used to do, right? So she talks about that. This is basically a promotion for Ashley because she's, you know, doing some exciting work. And then she also talks about other programs or departments where you see the potential for increased collaboration. At a minimum, the reason that we pose these questions to Ashley was also so that tribes might have these conversations with their elders program, community health, with air quality, and start to narrow down, you know, have we listened to elders about who they trust in the messaging, who do they want to show up at their door, all those questions, so that our risk communication is stronger. All right, I have just a couple more slides here. Next one, please. This is just it's lagging again. Wait a second. The housing deficit. So I just talked about the risk communication side. Eileen's about to come in and talk about the structural and mechanical. But just so you know, and depending on the housing that you're working with in your tribal nation, tribal community, it's pretty common to have minimal shading, depending if it was a HUD development, for example, insufficient insulation. And that drives people to having to use their heaters during cooling events and their cooling systems during heat events. And elders still may not achieve a thermally comfortable condition, right? And if they're low income, they may not adequately use the heating and cooling because of the cost, even if they have a LIHEAP program. That's a critical thing that we can address to ensure that they can use that cooling as much as they need and afford it, especially because elders have expressed a preference to stay in their homes as long as possible. Next slide. And then, you know, at Tulalip, we asked elders, you know, do you want to be in your home? Who do you want to be notified with? And the clear message again and again is, I want the resources in my home so that I can stay here, right? Their medications are there, their families there, their shows, their hobbies, their crafting, everything they want to do is there. However, they were responsive. About 67% said, well, if someone came and picked me up and took me to a cooling center or a clean room, I might be more likely to do that. So if it was not a social media blast, but if someone came to them to ask. So that gives us an important data point for thinking about how to design our future interventions. And next slide. I kind of just reiterated this or said this in advance, but the other thing I'll close with here is that almost half also said that they would be very likely to request a call, email, or text message from their doctor's office. So if we can have our clinical care integrated in our risk communication, because as you know, if my doctor's office called me and said, we are about to have a heat event, are you current, are you medications, are you adequately cool? I would be more likely to say, if they're concerned, if he or she is concerned, then maybe I should make sure I'm following the guidance around cooling. And we also found that even people are open to hearing from their pharmacists about those same kind of screening calls. So I'm going to stop there and move into now our technical advisor and trainer, Eileen, and I'll mute myself and be back shortly. And Eileen, you may need to open yours. Actually, they're advancing now just fine, so I think you'll be all right.
Yeah.
So next slide.
Well, this is actually, Gillian, still yours because you do know much more about the Inflation Reduction Act than I do. So,
yes, sorry, just yeah, really quickly, I want to talk about IRA. Yes. I know you've all probably been on webinars. Next slide, please. You know, this is what we all feel like right now. Before the IRA, we had barely a garden hose. Now we have a fire hose. And the reality is it may go back. So I'm just going to skip through this so we can get to Eileen. The most important thing I want to say about the IRA, oops, go back one more slide, is that it's in two buckets. 361 billion is going through grants, right? And that tribes will be eligible for quite a few. But 9 billion is going directly to consumers. That means individuals in your community starting late winter, early 2024 will be able to for what's called HERA, which is the Home Energy Efficiency Reduction Act. I think I missed an acronym. But the point is that's money people can apply for a heat pump, for a new Energy Star certified air conditioner. Those funds are things you're going to want to help the elders in your community so they know how to apply and when to apply and what they can do with that. All right, and I'll stop there. And Eileen, we're now moving right along.
Okay, next slide, please.
20 minutes left, just so you know.
Next, there you go. So we're going to talk about, you know, housing factors that contribute to high indoor temperatures, because as we'll find out, you know, where do you start when you look at your housing stock and go, okay, so we have this money coming in, but where do I begin? So let's just look at some of the factors that will contribute to what you decide on. Next slide. So the first one, obviously, is site, location, and landscaping. This environment you see right here is so inhospitable. I don't even see a dog running around here. So, I mean, I'm sorry, but the cooling on this would be extensive. There's no shade. There's no landscaping. There's all sorts of studies that come out to demonstrate how much, you know, greenery and trees and actually help keep a house cooler, and the whole environment becomes much more conducive to healthy living. Next slide. Then you have this house in particular. It actually looks pretty good, but I have seen far, far worse. And I don't think I've ever seen one with a metal roof like on this one. But we all have, a lot of tribes have been blessed, let's put it that way, with HUD housing, which is a cookie cutter type of housing that gets plopped down in an environment that it may not be suitable for, including what we see up at Tulalip. And unfortunately, we have run into a lot of substandard construction. The housing stock is old. It has not held up well. It was not intended to hold up well and is proving to be just that. Next. So here's part of that. You know, we've got old and inefficient heating and cooling systems. So you've got baseboard electric heaters and wall heaters, which are very inexpensive to install, but very expensive to run. And then window air conditioners, once again, the same thing here. They're pretty inexpensive to purchase, but very expensive to operate, as well as contribute tremendously to global warming. Next. So, and obviously insulation, air sealing, all these things, if old housing stock, and folks, 90% of our housing in this country needs to be upgraded. Most of it does. It's the newer construction that has a lot of these issues already taken care of. It's part of the code. It's part of the LEED certified housing. It's part of all these different programs that are out there to provide housing, to provide folks with housing that is superior. So we've got this inferior housing, which includes little or no insulation, or it's degraded. It's been infested with pests in both the ceiling, walls, and crawl spaces. And I'm sure if you haven't seen this, you will. Next. Also, you know, aging roofs. with damage, missing shingles, which lead to leaks, which can lead to mold, which leads to ruining insulation and deterioration of the structure itself. Next. So the same thing here, leaky and ill-feeding uninsulated doors, where over time this looks like a chipboard subfloor. Water gets in there, destroys it, and it leaks more water, it leaks more air. It's just not a good way to live, and it's not a healthy home. Next. Same with windows, single pane windows, or broken double pane where it's cloudy in between where the seal has been broken. Basically, those tend to be just single pane windows at that point. They're one of the largest causes of air infiltration and exhaust of heat and cooling from the house to the exterior. And as we all know, they're a big source of cold air in the winter. Next. So, and then you get to inoperable or non-existent bath and or kitchen fans. Fans in the kitchen, for example, that do not exhaust, that just blow the steam and the grease throughout the house. Bathroom fans that are not maintained, that do not get cleaned and may just exhaust to the attic. If we're lucky, they exhaust out, and if even luckier, if they work and don't just sound like a nightmare when you turn them on. Next. So ventilation is the key there. Next slide. Well, looks like I seem to be stuck on that one. So here we go. Retrofits and upgrades for home cooling. So the framework that we've developed, specifically Gillian, is looking at what are the exact what are the things that we can achieve for this framework to create an energy efficient, affordable, climate resilient, and healthy home. Next one. So next slide. What we came up with was there we go. And that's an acronym framework. It stands for the IRA funded retrofits and upgrades. So energy efficient, affordable, climate resilient, and healthy. So everything we're going to look at in the next slide will be in regards to this framework. So in terms of the IRA eligible upgrades and retrofits, there are maybe 6 that fit into this whole, that collect all of these frameworks. We have ductless mini splits. We have new kitchen and bathroom fans to increase your ventilation, an energy audit, new windows and doors, insulation, and air sealing. All of those 4 things, they fulfill all those requirements of being energy efficient, affordable, climate resilient, and healthy, and help to create a healthy, energy efficient, sustainable home. Next slide, please. So the first and foremost thing that needs to be done when you're looking at a home is you need to have an energy audit performed on that home. Where do you start? Well, the only way to know where to start is to have an energy audit performed, which actually includes looking at the home's heating or HVAC system, if there is one, the water heater, appliances, electronics, lighting, windows and doors, how leaky the home is, how well the systems work, if they work at all. So they use a wide range of equipment, from an infrared camera, a blower door, a duct blaster, temperature and humidity gauges, combustion analyzers, and there's a whole science to this to figure out where to get the biggest bang for the buck in terms of renovating this house. Next. So the weatherization package, it may not be real sexy, but it is really important. So what this does is the process of improving the energy efficiency and performance of your home through any number of strategies. It will make your home more energy efficient. It will increase your comfort, safety, and indoor air quality. So it does come down basically to air sealing and insulation, weatherization, looking at how air passes through and into the house, sealing up those corridors, and actually making the way air comes in and exhaust deliberate rather than accidental, where the air is coming in through the outlets or through the siding or around the windows. where it can bring anything it wants to from the outside with it, including wildfire smoke or heat. So that's a huge one. Next one. Then the IRA funding for your weatherization and energy audits is listed right here. You have the IRA Consumer Direct Funding, which does your non-competitive high-efficiency electric home rebate program, and your energy efficient home improvement credit, which is also non-competitive. The grant funding, which is a competitive process, does both the climate pollution reduction grants and the environmental and climate justice block grants. So you've got both of those options working with that you can work with. Next. And in this one, where you have new ventilation, bath and kitchen fans, such as this, so that you're exhausting the odors, the smells, the moisture, and the pollutants from the home. And what you're going to find is that Energy Star fans use 60% less energy. They're quiet, so they will probably get used. And next is where you'll find how to fund them. So the IRA Consumer Direct Funding, once again, you've got your HERA, which is your non-competitive funding source, and your energy efficient home improvement creditive. Both, once again, are non-competitive, and your IRA grant funding, which those are competitive, but once again, the climate pollution reduction grants and the environmental climate justice block grants. Next.
Can I jump in and add
Sure.
something? Oops,
Please.
can you go back one slide really quickly? I was just looking at, sorry, back. There we go. That one right there. Thank you. The HERA program sounds like it's billions, but it's actually going to run out. When I ran the math with how much tribes are going to be eligible for, it might fund like 30 to 40 households in your tribal community. So it's not unlimited, which is what I kind of hoped when the Congress first dropped the bill, and it looked like it was going to be amazing. The most important thing I want to emphasize is that you will not need the cash up front. If someone wants to do something with a house and they apply and they're going to do a heat pump and a weatherization to seal off things, they will get, if they're low income, a voucher at the point of sale. And you may already be aware of this, but they will not need to come up with it. A traditional, they call it a rebate program, but it's not going to be one where they have to wait 6 to 12 weeks to actually get that money back for what they paid. So critically important to note that that program is going to roll out pretty well. And again, it's getting our households ready to know when it drops and then how to apply. Thanks, Eileen. So I just
of course, anytime. You know that far better than I do. So then new windows and exterior doors, as we know, they are a huge heat and sink windows and a huge expense. Windows, the payback usually is about 40, 50, 60 years. However, but they're also responsible for 20 to 30% of a home's heating and cooling use, okay? But upgrading can save quite a bit of money per year, especially, and if you can get the money up front, which Gillian just talked about, that would be just beautiful, because part of the problem is you have these issues that you need to take care of, but who's got an extra 30, 40, 50, $60,000 sitting around? I don't know of anybody who does. So this is a great opportunity. Next slide, please. And then once again, windows and doors, here's your IRA Consumer Direct Funding. And as Gillian said, that's the coupons, but at the door is just a great thing. Your credit, your home improvement credit. And then once again, you've got your competitive grants that can be funded. Next, please. So here's your ductless mini pump system. So you've probably seen these little compressors outside, and then these white sort of tubes going up the side of homes. And inside are these big sort of systems that hang out on the wall. They are 3 times more efficient than generating heat from wood, gas, or oil. You have multi-heads for multi-rooms. It works the same way as another heat pump, which you already have in your home. It's also called a refrigerator. It's the same concept. It actually extracts heat from the outside air and transfers it into the inside, and vice versa when you want to cool. It is an amazing system. It is so efficient. It is a beautiful way to go. With these, however, the caveat is is that the filtration system does nothing for people. It protects the equipment. So just a heads up on that in case you're thinking you're going to get a really great the heating system with great filtration. That does not apply to this particular system. Next. Once again, here's your funding sources. You've got your high efficiency electric home rebate for the HERA and your energy efficient home improvement credit. And then also, once again, the competitive ones for that all the tribes or whomever can go for. Next, please. Air cleaners and HEPA filters. Now, this is an interesting one. There is no, we can't find any direct funding. I was talking to Gillian this morning saying, well, what about if somebody wanted to change out an electronic air cleaner that's in their HVAC system to a HEPA or a MERV 13? Would that be covered? Well, I think what they're covering are the appliances. They're not covering so much the inserts or things that help the appliances work better. That would be my understanding from this. And it kind of makes sense. Air cleaners, they're portable. They can be moved from home to home. The IRA is thinking of structural and real integral changes to the home environment. Heating, cooling, fans, ductless mini splits, that kind of thing. Next. And I think that looks like it's the end. Gillian, do you want to finish up with anything, or we can go directly to questions?
Yep, let's just go to questions. I put in the chat box the link to the seminar series if you want to hear Ashley's discussion with elders or the Dr. Chang.
We both put our emails up there. We also have on our website, tribalhealthyhomesnetwork.org. There is a tribal indoor air funding guide that you can go to that does all sorts of things. We are also available to talk with you about what could be funded, and if you need any assistance with understanding all these different new things that can be done to a home, like a heat pump, how it works, or an ERV, or an HRV heat recovery ventilator, anything like that. I'm happy to answer any questions anytime. Well, what do you think, Gillian? I don't see any questions in the chat box.
Go over to Q&A. I don't either, unless Sophia, are you in the room? Oh, good. Here's the attendees. Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Anybody in the room have questions or comments or observations from their own work?
We would also love to hear from people in the audience who are working on this for anything that has worked for them. There's no reason to reinvent the wheel when it comes to any of this. And whatever we can share across any platform, we would love to be able to, such as when we're handing out, for example, our Smoke Matters Toolkit, some of the tribes that have done that or affiliations, done things like, they tell us they've gone through Meals on Wheels to get them into homes during COVID, things like that. Excellent ways of community outreach that not everybody I can't think of everything. I'm happy to hear any suggestions or any thoughts anybody has. One of the things that has come up, and I will bring up, is that there seems to be a shortage of building scientists. So, and having an energy audit performed takes a trained energy auditor. And the Building Performance Institute is one of the organizations across the country that does trainings. And they seem to be in short supply. if anybody has a willingness and are able to get some folks trained and want to do this, now is the time to do that. Now is the time to get your folks into some of these training sessions, whether it be, learning about the EPA, I believe it's 305 certification system for installing the coolant in a ductless mini split, or becoming an auditor, or becoming a building analyst. It is a perfect time to be, training your staff to do this kind of work and to keep it in-house. If you could keep it in-house, you're going to save yourself lots of money, and you're creating more jobs and opportunities within your own village or tribe. And there's one question, wondering. Yeah.
This is Mansell.
Yeah, Mansell.
Hey there.
Thanks for sharing all this great information. I just had one observation as I've worked in various regions talking about HUD resources and use the term HUD homes. I just want to make sure people realize that a lot of those decisions are made at the tribal level. And we've referred to them as HUD homes because they are funded by HUD, and there are some guidelines that HUD gives, but a lot of decisions are made at the tribal level. And why that's important is it's important for all of us interested in healthy homes to be talking to our tribal housing offices and our tribal councils to make sure that they realize that there can be a different approach, as Eileen pointed out to us, that they can rehabilitate homes, and they can also build better homes to begin with. And it sometimes involves hard decisions because, do we build more homes or do we build healthy homes? And the reality is, of course, that we can build a healthy home for the same cost as we build a poorly built home. So I just wanted to comment on that because it's a phrase that we often use, but I want to make sure people realize they need to talk to their tribal housing folks to make some strides in that area. But thanks a lot, Gillian and Eileen. As always, I appreciate your information and all the efforts you do. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. So good to hear your voice. And y'all just,
Yeah, there's a question about wondering what support is available for planting of trees. Yeah, I don't think it's covered in the Inflation Recovery Reduction Act. I don't know.
No, I think it's a great question. So not to get too far into the weeds or the trees, no pun intended, but the Climate Pollution Reduction Act grants, some of your tribes may be involved. I don't know if you have climate programs, if you do, or if your air quality folks are involved. But at Tulalip, for example, we are preparing a climate pollution reduction plan, which makes us eligible for what's called implementation funds next spring of 2024. Almost all tribes who participate in this planning are going to be eligible. And it has incredible breadth with respect to energy efficiency, energy independence. And so I believe I've read that something as like landscaping could be included, because technically it could achieve net gains in heat reduction as much as better insulation or so. Yeah, I think it is included, but I think it depends on what the tribes plan for achieving energy autonomy and energy efficiency would look like, and that you may be able to write that into your grant.
That would be fabulous. It's crucial to, yeah.
And just I'll close with this, and I appreciate you guys, however much you were able to absorb at the end of the day. We've worked with Tulalip Housing for several decades, and housing directors move on, housing, construction, maintenance staff, resident services, you have to continue to build. But what we've been doing, actually just late summer, Eileen's doing this next week, but as more tribes build sort of net zero or indoor air plus homes, we're trying to get our tribal council and housing staff to come on a tour and see it. It's very powerful when they can see that, oh, they were able to get some additional funding and build these new 30 homes for elders or for the unhoused and make them green, healthy, and climate friendly. So whenever you can go see something like that and take decision makers, it goes a long way.
Yeah. And not only the finished structure, but also during construction, so they can actually see the added insulation, the air sealing, all the parts that make it as energy efficient and as green as possible. Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much, Gillian and Aileen. Big hand for them.
Thank you.
Here, people are clapping.
Wish we could have seen you and been there. Wish we could have been you. So long day. Anyway, guys, thank you. Take care.
Bye-bye.